Hello, it's been a minute since I've done a review, a video review anyway, because I'm lazy. I'm a lazy person. But here we are. There's been a lot of great movies to come out this year that I've really enjoyed. Recently, some great horror. This little film called Obsession came out a little under a month ago. Just a really tight script. One of those movies that I couldn't stop thinking about once I saw it, and it's anchored by some really fantastic performances. We're not going to talk about Obsession today. We're going to talk about Backrooms. I'll be upfront, I think it was a pretty mixed bag, and overall I didn't like it. I was kind of disappointed by the outcome. But we'll get into it. We'll talk a little about it. This is a spoiler review. I'm not going to do a non-spoiler. I don't know if this is the kind of movie that can really be spoiled, considering what actually happens in the movie, or what doesn't happen. But I'll get a little bit into the history. The history I know. I'm not like a lore master. I'm not a lore master about Backrooms, but I'm aware of it. You know, it started as an image that was posted on 4chan, and what they call a creepypasta, which is just it's a nothing. It's just like, look at this image. Isn't it kind of spooky? Liminal spaces, very spooky. To me, not so much, but I kind of get it. But the real kind of artistry that like breathed life into this image was this person, this man named Caden Parsons. And by man, I think he was, I'm going to get this wrong, probably. I think he was like 16 or maybe even younger when he did his first YouTube short on Backrooms. The genius aspect of the YouTube short was that it was created in Blender, involving Blender and After Effects. Basically, the way the camera moves felt very realistic. It felt like you were a person walking through these almost endless corridors that were askew or had weird things in it, and it just didn't fit right. And I get it. I get the aspect that it's interesting to people. It's like these spaces that are normally filled with, we're used to seeing buildings like this, cluttered with furniture and people and things on the wall and stuff like that. Earlier video reviews I did looked like a liminal space because I had nothing on my walls, Again, very lazy. But, for me, I don't know. It doesn't do a whole lot for me. When it comes to a horror movie, I'm drawn to like the characters and the journey they go through. And that might be my big issue with Backrooms, the movie. So let's get into the story a little bit. It features really two characters. The primary character is Clark, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. I'm not 100% sure on the pronunciation of that name. Clark is, he owns a furniture store, and it's kind of like a pirate theme. That's his thing. And this takes place during the 90s. And that's a factor that comes in midway through the movie. But he's going through a divorce, and he is super depressing. And he's basically living out of his store, and he's drinking a lot. And he has a therapist named Mary, played by Renate Reinsve, who is an actress I very much adore. She's responsible for two of my favorite performances from the past decade. And God, I'm gonna fuck up this pronunciation. I'm sorry, director Joachim Trier. Is that close? I might be messing up some letters and pronunciation. I'm sorry. But he directed The Worst Person in the World, as well as Sentimental Value, which was my favorite movie from 2025. Absolutely adore that movie. Absolutely adore Renate's performance in that movie. She's brilliant. So she plays his therapist, and he's kind of struggling with this divorce, and she's kind of having these flashbacks that we see throughout the movie. Basically, her mom seemed really like schizophrenic, admitted to a psych hospital at some point, it seems. And Mary is kind of, I don't know, she's kind of processing that. So Clark and Mary are both kind of processing a kind of grief, I suppose. So it's with that in mind that Clark is experiencing some weird things in his store, like lights flickering, and he calls an electrician, and they're going through like the circuit breaker and stuff like that, and he's like, "Well, God, I don't know what these switches are for." He doesn't sound anything like that, but but anyway, Clark is trying to piece together what's going on, and sometimes his TV will randomly turn off, and no explanation. But he discovers that basically there's a spot in the wall in the bottom floor of his store where he can just phase right through it. He can walk right through it and discover the back rooms. And the initial space that he discovers is just kind of like, it's this giant room. It's all tinted kind of yellow. And there's just furniture like piled up. Like someone just tossed a bunch of furniture. And I think one of the best things this movie has going for it, at least in the first half or 2/3 of the movie even, is the mystery. You know, that sense of discovery and what's going on. I don't mind a horror movie that is a slow burn. And I was kind of enthralled a little bit. It's like he goes towards the pile of furniture and there's two like bar stools, but they're stuck together. Why? Interesting. He's walking through the hallway. There's a stop sign at the end of one hallway, but it's in reverse, you know, pots. And sometimes there's just architecture that doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, doors that are just a little bit too small. Things like that. And while I didn't find it super unsettling, I could see how some people might. Just a good deal of this movie, at least the beginning part of this movie, is just following Clark as he's kind of discovering these rooms and what are inside the rooms. And like some things, there's furniture like partially phased through the floor, so it's like sticking out a little bit. And then he hears something and he knows he's not alone. So he decides to enlist one of his employees, played by, I have to look it up because I like her a lot in the Apple show Shrinking. Her name is something. It is Lukita Maxwell. It was kind of nice to see her, but she plays a very small role in this. Anyway, he recruits her and her boyfriend to be like, "Hey, I've discovered something in the store. Your boyfriend has a video camera. Bring it. Let's just shoot this thing and see what we can find." So with that in mind, it begins probably the best portion of this movie, which is the found footage segment. Very reminiscent of any found footage movie you've seen, but that doesn't make it any less effective. I feel like probably the only reason this is placed in the 90s is to insert a found footage thing, because it's on, you know, a camcorder. It's like VHS quality. So you're like, as they're traversing the back rooms, I think the really smart thing that director Kane Pearsons did with this was establish a lot of the back rooms normally with Clark, you know, the regular camera. And now when we return there with the trio, we're watching a camcorder footage. So we kind of know a little bit of the layout, but we're still looking for details. And, you know, trying to find those details in the like camcorder footage, you know, it reminds me of like the old days of YouTube, you know, where everything was kind of up in the air and uncertain. Nowadays, who gives a shit? We just assume it's all AI. Where's the fun in that? But I think there is a real kind of fun sense of like discovery and a little bit of dread in what they're going to discover. You know, shit goes awry, of course, as it does, and eventually Mary is looking for her, you know, her client essentially, and so she visits the store and then finds herself in the back rooms. And this is, I think, the moment for me where I really dropped hard off the movie. In the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a scene where the lone survivor, the final girl, she gets captured, and as opposed to getting killed like all of her friends, she is tied down and forced to like kind of have dinner. There's a dinner scene with the family there. In any kind of monster movie, slasher movie, what have you, the monster, the slasher is trying to get at the person, to presumably kill them. But we know if there's one person left, once the monster gets them, they're not going to die right away. Otherwise, the movie would be over. So there's always some conceit of the monster wanting to keep that person alive because the movie has to go on. So when I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre many years ago, I was like, this just feels like they're biding their time until Leatherface can chase this poor girl down the street again, And the dinner scene is they're all a bunch of wacky characters, and wow, isn't this crazy and kind of unsettling? I don't know. I was always kind of bored by those kind of scenes. So, unfortunately for this movie, there is that kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre dinner scene where Mary finds Clark and he kind of reveals what he thinks he knows about the Backrooms, and he's like, oh, the Backrooms, it's kind of this living entity, and it remembers everything that enters the Backrooms, and then tries to copy it. And that's why there's these weird kind of freaky people in the Backrooms. They're like echoes of actual people that used to exist, or maybe still exist, but probably not. There's a bunch of freaks in there, man. It's crazy. But there's like a dinner scene and stuff that doesn't really make much sense. And as this scene was unfolding, I'm sitting there and I could feel like my enthusiasm for the movie wane. And I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. Not very exciting, not very compelling anymore. The movie has shown its hand, and it's not a very high one. So Mary, of course, eventually escapes. There's a tall pirate guy who's kind of the manifestation of maybe Clark's real, persona, or maybe at least the darkest part of his persona. I won't. There are other details. We'll talk about lore in a second, but you can read into it as much as you want. Like, it's not just a giant pirate monster. There's a reason for it being that, given that the pirate is the mascot for Clark's store. But basically, it's kind of a chase sequence where Mary has to get away from this guy and try to escape the back rooms. And while this whole movie is kind of unfolding, we're introduced to another character played by Mark Duplass. I think his name is Phil, close. And what we know about Phil is that he's observing. He works for some company that's observing what's going on in the back rooms. So eventually, Mary is knocked out, but alive. And the end of the movie, the kind of crux of the movie is kind of an exit interview with Phil. And he's like, hey, I work for a company. We used to build MRI machines, and now we do this. We think this is probably the most important thing ever discovered. Can you tell us about your experience? And that's kind of like how it ends. I mean, there's a little bit more. I'm shaving off some details just in case you don't want every fucking thing spoiled for you. But that's basically it. And you're just kind of going like, oh, that's all. So I'll tell you why. I had to get through the story, the gist of the story, so I could tell you why I felt it was so disappointing. And that's because I'm very driven by a horror movie that pays special attention to its characters and their character arcs. And regarding Clark, I suppose you could chronicle his arc as a descent into madness, or at least into the person he really was on the inside that he was trying to hide. And in this way, I felt Backrooms was kind of like the shining light. You know, there's something about Stanley Kubrick's direction and the deliberate nature of his shots and camera movement. And we know he's such a stickler for performances because we've heard the rumors over, the years back when he was alive, like, oh, he'd make this actor do such and such many takes just to do this thing. So he seemed like a perfectionist, at least in establishing the shots and the performances that he wanted us to see. And I think you kind of get a sense of that when you watch a Stanley Kubrick film. It's, to quote Family Guy, it kind of insists upon itself, but it works. We watch those movies like The Shining or Full Metal Jacket or Eyes Wide Shut, and there you feel that sense of purpose in kind of every shot, and every line of dialogue seems like meticulously placed. Like it's this puzzle that Stanley Kubrick knows the answer to, and we're trying to piece together. And I just felt that was missing here. Clark is very much the Jack Torrance of the story, except his descent into madness is really more like a descent into he's kind of wacky and he's gone. Unfortunately gobbled up by Pirate Clark. So we never even get that full range from him. Similarly, I think it's my biggest disappointment of the movie is Renate Reinsve. I fucking love her performances in those movies I mentioned previously. She's amazing. What an amazing character performer. You put her in a room with other actors and it's effortless. The way she bounces off the others and the restraints in her character and what she's showing. And here, the entire movie, she just looked very confused. She looked like basically as confused as I was. Not so much about the story, but about like, is this what this movie really is? Okay. Almost like when she was being chased by this giant pirate monster, which, horror is subjective. What's scary is subjective. So is it kind of silly? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah, it's fine. But like, she just looked more like nonplussed. Like that's her face for like most of the movie. And I hate to say it, but I think she was just miscast, or maybe, poorly directed as far as what we were trying to get out of this movie. Because you think about recent horror movies where characters are experiencing trauma and the cyclical nature of trauma and how that can manifest itself in situations throughout the movie, especially in a movie like this where it's suggested that the Backrooms are this kind of living entity. People have pointed out that like, oh, the company that makes the MRI machines, they can see into the brain. Maybe Backrooms is like a brain of sorts, That's the parallel, I guess. But the Backrooms, they manifest your trauma in certain ways and yourself in certain ways. And there's a lot of interesting drama to mine there. And in fact, there's really interesting arcs to mine with both Clark and Mary. Clark seemingly wasn't able to let go of his trauma, or at least when he seemed maybe ready to begin that journey, it was too late. Mary, on the other hand, seems more willing to, I guess, but there's never those like strong character moments where we're really feeling for these characters, what they're going through. Look at like Ari Aster's, Hereditary or Midsummer, and how that trauma manifests itself into these very tense, emotional scenes. And with this movie, we don't really have those scenes with the characters. I think Chiwetel does a really fantastic job with this character. Like we're drawn into it, but then they just kind of drop him off, and it's not a very satisfying conclusion for him. And that, I suppose it would be fine for Mary's character, Mary, to take the baton of lead protagonist and race to the finish line. but her character doesn't really work. She's not inherently like interesting. She's not given much to do except look confused. And there are some moments earlier on where we're listening or hearing like tapes she's recorded, and it almost seems like she's like selling something she doesn't believe in. I'm pretty sure that's what, well, I feel that's what they were going for with those early scenes. But I never got the sense that we were exploring any part of her that was coming to terms with her being a phony, or at least her struggling with the idea that she has not gotten over her trauma and she's putting on a front by helping others. And again, that's really interesting drama to mine. I'll always go back to like the original Exorcist as far as why it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's not because of all the great effects and sound design and all that shit. It's because it's a great character study. You come to know and like these characters so much. Father Karras, who's having a struggle of faith throughout the entire movie and then comes to terms with it and becomes selfless by the movie's end. That's like such an interesting and powerful arc, and the way it manifests itself throughout the movie and comes to a head at the very end during the exorcism scene. You know, basically when he has to nut up or shut up. And he nuts up. Father Karras, he nuts up. You know? And there's no moments like that for these characters. And, you know, I earlier I compared this to The Shining. And you can argue there's no moments really like that for those characters either. And I'd be inclined to agree with you. But there's still something that compels that movie through the end. I mean, look at, you know, Jack. He basically becomes this person he was all along, seemingly. I mean, I'm not here to argue like book versus movie and shit like that, but there's something inherently terrifying about your parental figure trying to murder you, and that's what's driving the rest of the movie. And I don't think Renate had to give a performance like Shelley Duvall's in The Shining, but at least Shelley Duvall is like, find her annoying or not, I don't. I mean, she's going through some shit and her husband's trying to kill her. That's frightening. And it's, you know, alluded to that she knows what he's capable of. So she's losing her fucking shit during that movie. And like, you compare any one of those scenes with what Renate is going through during this movie and just like, huh? It just sucks all the drama. Like, where's that good drama? You know, to be mined. It's just, you know, it just feels kind of messy and haphazard. And, you know, the movie has a lot of great set design and kind of ideas. And I liked the mystery going in, but it just had nothing coming out of it. It's like everything leading up to it. And you finally enter the back rooms and you look around and you're like, oh, it's a whole lot of nothing. So I think your mileage is going to vary on a few things. One, if you kind of grew up and love these like YouTube shorts, everyone's noticed, there's a lot of YouTubers kind of breaking into the horror market right now with varying degrees of success. Obsession is one that really worked for me. And I definitely want to do a video on that once I've seen the movie again, just to further digest it and appreciate it. But look at Five Nights at Freddy's. That was like a video game property that became a very shitty movie. But a lot of people who grew up with that game and just fucking can't get enough of the lore, you know, loved it. Iron Lung, Markiplier. Didn't like the movie at all. But that's another game where it's like, all right, here's a lore dump on Wikipedia. If you didn't read it, you're a dumbass, you know? And a movie needs to stand on its own. I think Backrooms does stand on its own. It's just not a very firm stance. And ultimately disappointing. Harkening back to the original Backrooms picture, you know, if you find that inherently creepy and offsetting and off-putting, then you might be more drawn to this. I think you might be more drawn, especially to the first 2/3 of the movie, which follows Clark just exploring the space, and also the found footage segment, which was genuinely creepy and well done for the most part. But if you're looking for that last third of the movie to bring it home, it doesn't. And in fact, it was a third of the movie that for me was so bad that I was really disappointed. And there's something that makes a movie worse when you're into it or looking forward to it and it disappoints, as opposed to it being just kind of, you know, mediocre the entire time. You know, so for me, it's a hard movie to rate. I didn't like it overall, you know, and in fact, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, you know, those first 2/3 didn't lead to much. And of course, the character of Mary didn't really mean anything to me or the story, especially if she is Clark's therapist and can't even save him in the end. I never felt that her experience in the back room really became like her journey. You know, as we're experiencing the back rooms with Clark, we feel that it's his journey. We kind of almost understand why he has to take it upon himself to discover this, especially given the divorce. He's got nothing else going on. Mary, I didn't feel the same way. She was just kind of, she showed up there and then she got out of there, you know, and that was kind of it. So yeah, overall disappointing movie. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because I think half of it was really good and compelling and some really cool stuff in there. But the other half, it's just like, it's not very well written. The characters, aside from Clark, I don't think were very compelling, and a huge misfire as far as the character of Mary and Renate Reinsve goes, which is super unfortunate. It was reported that Kristen Milioti was in talks to play that role, and it just didn't happen. And I think the movie would have been good if Kristen was in there? No, I don't think it would have been much better, but I think it probably would have been a better fit. You know, you think about the Black Mirror episode she did, or I guess episodes. I didn't see the follow-up to that one. The Star Trek episode, basically. And how well she was at portraying that sense of like hopelessness and kind of dread. And I can imagine that translating pretty well over to this. But it was just missing something. You know, but I got to give Kane Parsons some credit. The dude's 20. He made this when he was 20. I think he's the youngest guy to work with A24 on a movie. And that's really awesome. I mean, he's got a lot of, you know, work on his YouTube channel you can seek out if you want. And the fact that he did that YouTube short when he did and how successful it was, that's amazing. So I'm certainly not trying to slight Kane in the slightest. But, you know, he's also young. He's got a lot to learn. So it's one of those things like, cool, that was an admirable first effort. And technically proficient on a lot of levels, but like, I want to see what else he can do, and I hope he's not. I'd rather see him step away from Backrooms and do something else. But this movie is poised to make, God, I think the numbers went as high as like 60, 75 million the first like opening weekend. I think it made 10 million on Thursday, so preview night, which is crazy. So this will be A24's biggest opening. And I have no doubt that after this weekend, they're going to be like, hey, are you interested in the sequel? Let's see how much it costs to make. My guess is 5 million. Let's see if that's right. None of this is going to make the final video. Backrooms. So this movie was apparently made for 10 million. I guess I can see that. 10 million. That seems like 5 million too much. Especially when you look at Obsession, that was made for $750,000. But again, we'll talk about that another time. So yeah, this movie is going to be in the green after this weekend, no doubts. So I also believe like A24 is going to be like, hey, Kane, what about some sequels? So yeah, it's just wholly disappointing. If liminal spaces, like they don't do anything for you, you'll probably find this movie a lot more boring than even I did. But I think it was the end game that just kind of killed it for me. Yeah. But I also feel like I'm going to be in the minority on this one. I remember sitting in the theater, and the moment the credits started rolling, there was a guy behind me, and he's like, I could watch 3 more hours of that. And in my head, I'm like, you're a madman. Like, I would be so bored by that. But I get the sentiment. So, definitely not a movie for me. I hope we get some more compelling stories and more compelling characters in the inevitable next one that comes out. So, thanks for can't even talk anymore. I need to stop doing these at 3 in the morning. Thanks for listening to me. Fuck. All right, it's late. Thank you for listening to me talk about the Backrooms. I'm more than welcome to hear your opinions about it. Feel free to tell me how wrong I am. I'll just disagree with you, but it's fine. You know, art is subjective, man. That's the beautiful thing about film. It's subjective. And this movie is subjectively stupid. Take care.